And I love this, bringing up Mary Magdalene and Jesus. If you haven't read any of the Mary's Gospels and, a few of the other books that have come forward that have been edited out of the Bible, it's not that the Bible's wrong. It's not that, people that follow that are wrong at all. It's like people only know what they've been told. And, there was a lot of manipulation that went on. It was part of the cycle of going into the darkness. The elements of control took out the parts of the Bible, even the teachings of Jesus, that spoke about our power is within, that spoke about, we are the universe, we are everything, we are God, we are, the greater all of these teachings were taken out to disempower people so that they could maintain control, right? That's what the churches and the kings all got together and, tried to, well, they did, took all the money off everyone in the whole wide world, so they maintained control and, no, not as much continue to do so now. Corporates have kind of taken over. Corporates have kind of taken over that role. But in those days, it's actually what happened. And so, they've found scrolls that were scattered around into the far reaches of the earth so they couldn't be destroyed. When the Romans went and destroyed a lot of the ancient Greek temples and ancient Egypt, a lot of the old knowledge was lost, particularly about the laws of the universe. That's where a lot of the stuff comes from. It comes from those times where that information was pondered. It was opened. When we ponder things, we open frequency fields to be able to access even greater depth of what's already there. Remember, all of this information is in the quantum field, and it's really our capacity to interact with it in a non-judgmental way is what allows the field to stay open to explore what's there, without letting the ego jump in. It's like tame the ego to stop blocking, I'm not good enough to be able to know these sorts of things. We all are, like, all the information's there. And so, Mary is the divine feminine to Jesus's divine masculine. Of course, right? It makes sense. It's the balance. It wasn't just the male, 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 male. They had us believe that, of course, because that was the hierarchy taking back control in fear of the power of the women's faith, the strength in faith, which we're all coming back to again now, but just to bring the balance back. And so Mary's actually got a really interesting story that she was trained for that all of her life. She traveled. Her father was very learned in the mystery schools. She traveled with him at a really young age to learn the mysteries, to learn the greater reality, to learn to be able to hold the energetic match of the frequency, to hold Jesus. The woman energy is the container. And Mother Mary, I've worked with Mother Mary quite a lot. She comes through for me because in one of my incarnations, she was one of my teachers. She's also a very learned, mystery school teacher. How could she have possibly held the frequency of Jesus if she wasn't, holding that amount of light herself? And so, it's so fascinating to really start to, dive into that even more. Like, I have spent time with Mother Mary. I know that I have been in a timeline with the Essenes before. So the Essenes were the peoples that were doing the teachings, were, looking after Mary, all the Marys, Jesus, and all of that, in that particular time. But Jesus himself traveled to mystery schools all over the continent. Like, they went and learnt with the yogis over India way in the mountains, and they went and learnt with the druids over, in England. It was a lot more broad than, I guess than we're aware of. But, mystery school teachings were all around the world, but they were called mystery schools because they were only for those who, at that time, with such great density, had the capacity to understand. It's the same as all of those great temples of Egypt and the great temples of Greece as well, where a lot of those old philosophers, all of that, the brilliance that came out of that time. And that's why, because they were all working within the field of the greater reality, not in the limited, not conscious, the limited field of what we know scientifically. It's really limited. It's limited in that science needs to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But the problem with the science is the instruments aren't sensitive enough, and the experimental method is not broad enough at the same time as deep enough to be able to even start to access proving or supporting any of these theories about the greater reality. Quantum theorizes a lot, and then from the, the mathematical, theories that they see, because they see patterns, they look at patterns, dimensional realities and all of that, and then they have to reverse engineer to try to create physically dense experiments to be able to show what is demonstrated through the patterns of the mathematical symbols and the geometry, and which is the very coding of life, right? And so, it's the limitation of the old world that still, follows us a lot and sticks with us a lot. And, not that it's anyone's fault, that's just the way it was then. But even like the guides say, it's like to go through the darkness solidifies the light. To go through all of that complete darkness and separation and misery where we've been coming from, where we've been through as a collective, to now come back to light, makes that light is so much more potent because it's coming from the darkness. It's like you can recognize so many more aspects of the light when it hasn't been, now as it's arriving again. And so, there's method in all of the madness, even, things that, even, doing that to the Bible and, the manipulation the media does now to people. Like, it's ridiculous. They tell news like this, or it's even like this these days. They're like, oh, what do we want people to know? Okay, show them that, show them that, show them that. And unfortunately, some people think that that's everything. Still, not many now. There's probably about I think people are waking up. More and more people are waking up, which is thank goodness. But it's already happened. Like, the light is returning. Everything, all of the parts are in place for our ascension to continue. And it's nothing's predestined, and so it's not how long is it going to take. It's like, how will it unfold in the most gentle way for everybody? Having everything we've ever believed all our life challenged, that's freaking hardcore. And people who are very stuck in the ego, they can't cope with that. They're like, no, that couldn't be right. And that, all of the blah, 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 blah that goes with the ego mind. And we all have it. But, until we start to awaken, recognize our light, integrate our light more and more so that we can raise our frequency to be able to even hold the possibilities of these higher frequency potentials, that's the inner work. And if people are choosing to do the inner work, then they're actually not able to access that level of information. They're not able to understand it. And, so it's really about the courage to do the inner work, to have the courage to meet our own rubbish is what supports us to evolve through it. And, not everybody is not everybody's willing to do that. And, that's okay. And, that becomes our mastery as we heal, because the unhealed gets more and more obvious. Our mastery is to be able to continue to hold them with compassion. It doesn't mean we have to, put ourselves in situations that aren't aligned for us, but it's still allowing others to do whatever they want to do over there, without getting mixed up, because as soon as we bring in our own judgments, we're lowering our frequency to be hierarchical and judgmental, just like the old world.